Living in the shadow of someone you're supposed to love unconditionally is a kind of heartbreak that chips away at your soul, piece by piece, until you barely recognize yourself anymore. For 27 years, I carried the weight of being second best in my own family, always wondering what I had done wrong to deserve the constant comparison, the casual dismissal, the way my parents' eyes would light up when my sister Emma walked into a room and dim when they settled on me. This is the story of how I finally learned to stand up for myself, and how sometimes the most beautiful revenge is simply refusing to disappear. Growing up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in a modest two-story house with peeling blue paint and a garden my mother never quite managed to keep alive, I learned early that love in our family was rationed, and my sister Emma always got the larger portion. The signs were subtle at first, the kind of things that make you question whether you're being too sensitive or imagining slights that don't exist. When we were children, if Emma accused me of breaking her toy or eating her candy, my parents would instantly believe her and send me to my room without dinner. But when I came to them with tears streaming down my face, holding the pieces of my favorite stuffed animal that Emma had deliberately destroyed in a fit of rage, they would sigh and tell me that accidents happen, that I needed to learn to share and be more understanding of my older sister's needs. My birthday cakes were always vanilla with strawberry frosting because that was Emma's favorite flavor, even though everyone in the family knew I was allergic to strawberries and would break out in hives if I so much as licked the frosting. My parents would stand there watching me blow out my candles on a cake I couldn't eat, then act surprised when I asked for a plain piece without frosting, as if they had genuinely forgotten about my allergy year after year. Christmas mornings were orchestrated around Emma's preferences too, with the expensive gifts appearing under the tree for her while I received practical items like socks and school supplies, wrapped in leftover paper from the year before. When I was 8 and Emma was 9, I remember asking my mother why Santa seemed to like Emma more than me, and she laughed that brittle laugh that meant I had said something inappropriate, and told me that Santa gives children what they deserve based on how good they've been all year. The inequality extended to every aspect of our daily lives in ways that seem almost comical now but felt devastating to my young heart. Family outings were planned around Emma's interests, so we spent countless weekends at dance recitals and gymnastics competitions, cheering for her while I sat quietly in uncomfortable folding chairs, watching her beam in the spotlight. When I expressed interest in joining the school choir, my parents said we couldn't afford the costume fees, but somehow they found money for Emma's private violin lessons and her summer art camp. Our family vacations were chosen based on Emma's preferences too, usually beach destinations where she could show off her tan and her new swimsuits while I burned easily and spent most of the time reading under an umbrella, feeling invisible and forgotten. School became my refuge, the one place where I could excel without constantly being compared to Emma or having my achievements diminished. I threw myself into my studies with the desperate intensity of someone trying to prove their worth, earning straight A's semester after semester, winning academic awards, making the honor roll consistently. But when I brought home my report cards or certificates, my parents would glance at them briefly and say something like, "Well, of course you did well. School has always been easy for you," as if my hard work and dedication were somehow less valuable because they came naturally. Meanwhile, when Emma managed to scrape together a B- in any subject, there would be celebrations and ice cream and calls to relatives to share the good news about how much she was improving. The dynamic between Emma and me was complicated in the way that sibling relationships often are when parents play favorites so blatantly. At first, when we were very young, Emma mostly ignored me, content to bask in the constant praise and attention from our parents without needing to actively work against me. But as we entered our teenage years and the social hierarchies of high school became more important, something shifted in her attitude toward me. I had always been naturally thin, partly due to genetics, but mostly because my punishments often involved missing meals or having treats withheld, while Emma had inherited our parents' rounder build and their habit of expressing love through food. I didn't think much about physical appearance at the time, being more focused on my books and my grades, But I began to notice that boys at school seemed to pay attention to me in ways they didn't with Emma. This newfound attention, as mild as it was, seemed to trigger something competitive and cruel in my sister. She began actively working to undermine my social relationships, telling my parents elaborate stories about how my friends were bad influences who encouraged me to skip school or experiment with drugs, none of which was true. My parents, already predisposed to believe Emma over me in any dispute, began restricting my social activities, cancelling planned sleepovers, and forbidding me from joining after-school clubs. They would sit me down for serious conversations about the importance of choosing good friends and staying focused on what really mattered, using Emma as an example of someone who valued family time over the fleeting friendships that would ultimately disappoint me. The isolation became more pronounced as Emma's own social life at school began to falter. She had always struggled to maintain friendships, partly due to her entitled attitude, and partly because she had never learned how to treat people as equals, rather than subjects who should automatically defer to her wishes. When her small group of friends began drifting away during our junior year, instead of reflecting on her own behaviour, Emma seemed to decide that the solution was to prevent me from having what she couldn't maintain. She escalated her campaign of accusations, telling our parents increasingly dramatic stories about my supposed misconduct, my disrespectful attitude, my secret rebellious activities, that she was only reporting out of concern for my well-being. My parents ate up these stories with an eagerness that was heartbreaking to witness, as if Emma was confirming suspicions they had harboured about me all along. They began monitoring my phone calls, searching my room regularly, and questioning me about my whereabouts with the intensity of detectives investigating a crime. The more isolated I became, the more I retreated into myself, spending hours in my room reading or studying, trying to become so academically accomplished that they would have to acknowledge my worth. But even my stellar grades and academic achievements were dismissed as evidence that I was antisocial and overly serious, lacking the natural social grace and easygoing personality that made Emma such a joy to be around. The situation reached a breaking point during my senior year when I brought home my first serious boyfriend, Marcus, a sweet boy from my AP literature class who shared my love of books and had dreams of becoming a teacher. My parents insisted on meeting him, despite my reluctance to subject him to their particular brand of hospitality, which usually involved making guests feel unwelcome while simultaneously judging them harshly. The evening started badly when Emma appeared in the living room wearing an outfit that was more appropriate for a nightclub than a family dinner, batting her eyelashes at Marcus and launching into a monologue about how difficult I was to live with, how moody and controlling I could be, how she worried that I would never find someone patient enough to deal with my many personality flaws. Marcus, to his credit, was visibly uncomfortable with Emma's behaviour and excused himself to find me in the kitchen where I was helping my mother finish preparing dinner. He told me quietly that Emma had cornered him in the hallway and made several inappropriate comments, including suggesting that he would be much happier dating someone more fun and outgoing like herself. When Emma later told my parents a completely fabricated story about Marcus making unwanted advances toward her, which she had nobly rejected out of loyalty to me, I wasn't surprised that they believed her instantly and without question. What broke my heart was the way they looked at me with such disappointment, as if my poor judgment in choosing boyfriends was just another example of my fundamental inability to make good decisions. The relationship with Marcus didn't survive the constant scrutiny and suspicion from my parents, who made it clear that he was no longer welcome in our home and that I was forbidden from seeing him outside of school. The pattern repeated itself with the next boy I dated, and then again with another, until I finally gave up on trying to maintain romantic relationships while living under my parents' roof. Emma, meanwhile, brought home a series of boyfriends who were treated like visiting royalty, showered with attention and praise from my parents, who seemed determined to demonstrate how much more mature and trustworthy Emma was compared to me. The inequality in our treatment became even more glaring as we approached graduation and college applications. Emma had been accepted to a small state school about 3 hours away, not a particularly prestigious institution, but a perfectly respectable place where she could continue her mediocre academic performance while enjoying the social aspects of college life. My parents made a huge production of her acceptance, throwing a party for relatives and friends, buying her new luggage and dorm room decorations, talking constantly about how proud they were of their college-bound daughter. When it came time for me to apply to schools, however, the enthusiasm was markedly different. I had worked tirelessly throughout high school to maintain a high GPA and participate in extracurricular activities that would strengthen my college applications. I spent countless hours researching scholarships and financial aid opportunities, knowing instinctively that my parents would not be as generous with me as they had been with Emma. My intuition proved correct when my mother sat me down during the spring of my senior year and explained, with what she seemed to believe was great kindness, that since they were already paying for Emma's education, there simply wasn't money left over for mine. She suggested that I might want to consider taking a gap year to work and save money, or perhaps enrolling in community college classes part-time while living at home and contributing to household expenses. The conversation was delivered with such casual certainty that it took me several moments to process what she was actually saying. Not only would I not receive the same financial support that Emma had been given automatically, but I was expected to pay rent to continue living in my childhood bedroom while working to fund my own education. When I asked about student loans, my mother explained that she and my father would need to co-sign in any applications, and they wanted to carefully review any college programs I was considering to make sure they were worthy of me going into debt. The implication was clear. They would control not only whether I could borrow money for school, but where I was allowed to attend and what I was permitted to study. Instead of arguing or pleading, I simply nodded and thanked them for being honest with me about their financial limitations. My calm response seemed to surprise my mother, who had apparently expected tears or tantrums that would justify their decision to prioritize Emma's education over mine. But I had learned long ago that emotional reactions only provided them with more ammunition to use against me, more evidence of my instability and immaturity compared to Emma's even-tempered nature. What my parents didn't know was that I had been preparing for exactly this scenario for years, applying for scholarships and grants with the methodical determination of someone who knew that my future depended entirely on my own efforts. When the acceptance letter arrived from Northwestern University, along with a full academic scholarship, I felt a surge of vindication and pride that nearly brought me to my knees. I had done it completely on my own, without their help or support, or even their belief in my abilities. I was going to attend one of the most prestigious universities in the country, and it wouldn't cost them a single penny. I strategically announced the news on social media before telling my parents, posting a photo of myself holding the acceptance letter and scholarship notification, with a caption thanking them for teaching me the value of hard work and self-reliance. The public nature of the announcement made it impossible for them to forbid me from accepting the scholarship or attending the university, as they would have had to explain to our extended family and their friends why they were standing in the way of such an incredible opportunity. For a brief shining moment, I thought maybe this achievement would finally earn me the recognition and respect I had been craving my entire life. My parents did seem genuinely proud at first, sharing the post on their own social media accounts and basking in the congratulations from friends and neighbors who were impressed by their daughter's accomplishment. But the pride was short-lived, and I could tell that Emma was working behind the scenes to undermine my success in whatever way she could. Within a few weeks, my parents began expressing doubts about whether Northwestern was really the right fit for me, wondering aloud whether I was mature enough to handle such a competitive academic environment, suggesting that maybe I would be happier at a smaller school closer to home where they could keep an eye on me. They shared that Emma was struggling with her college coursework and was feeling overwhelmed by the social pressures of dormitory life, implying that if someone as smart and capable as Emma was having difficulties, I would surely find college even more challenging. I held firm to my decision, and that fall I packed my few belongings into a single suitcase and took the train to Chicago to begin my new life as a Northwestern student. College was indeed challenging, but in the most wonderful way possible, pushing me intellectually and creatively in ways that made me feel fully alive for the first time in my life. I thrived in the academic environment, forming friendships with classmates who valued intelligence and curiosity over superficial social hierarchies. I discovered that I loved literature and writing, eventually choosing English as my major with the dream of becoming either a teacher or a journalist. The distance from my family provided me with the perspective I needed to understand how toxic my childhood had been and how much of my sense of self-worth had been eroded by years of being treated as less important, less valuable, less deserving of love and attention. Still called home regularly and visited during breaks, but I began setting boundaries around how much of their negativity and criticism I was willing to absorb. When my parents made disparaging comments about my appearance or my choices or my personality, I would calmly change the subject or end the conversation, refusing to engage in the old patterns of defense and justification that had never served me well. During my junior year, Emma dropped out of college without graduating, moving back into my parents' house and getting a job at the same insurance company where my mother worked. My parents presented this development as a positive thing, explaining that Emma had realized college wasn't for her and had chosen to start her career early instead of wasting time on a degree she didn't need. The fact that they had spent thousands of dollars on her tuition and living expenses for 3 years didn't seem to factor into their narrative about her practical decision to enter the workforce. It was around this time that I met David, a graduate student in the journalism program who shared my passion for storytelling and social justice issues. David was everything that my family was not: supportive, encouraging, intellectually curious, and completely uninterested in the petty dramas and power games that had defined my childhood. He listened to my stories about growing up with genuine shock and anger, helping me realize that the treatment I had normalized was actually quite severe and had likely caused lasting psychological damage. David had a natural confidence and assertiveness that I found both attractive and slightly intimidating, as he seemed incapable of tolerating unfairness or backing down from confrontation when he believed he was right. When David and I decided to get married after graduation, I was both thrilled and terrified at the prospect of introducing him to my family. I had told him stories about their behavior over the years, but I worried that he wouldn't fully understand the dynamics until he experienced them firsthand. I also feared that being around my family would change how he saw me, that he might begin to doubt my version of events or wonder if I was as difficult and problematic as they always claimed I was. David, however, was excited about meeting them, approaching the situation with the confidence of someone who had grown up in a loving, functional family and couldn't quite believe that parents would actually treat one child so differently from another. We were living in Minneapolis at the time, both working as journalists for a local newspaper, and we decided to have our wedding in Cedar Rapids so that my extended family wouldn't have to travel far. The decision was partly practical and partly sentimental, as I still had happy memories of time spent with my aunts and uncles and cousins who had always treated me kindly and seemed to genuinely care about my well-being. David was eager to meet all of them, and he spent weeks researching hotels and venues and photographers, determined to plan a wedding that would be memorable for all the right reasons. The trouble started when we sent out our engagement announcement and saved the date cards, and my parents immediately demanded to meet David before the wedding. I tried to put them off, suggesting we could all get together at the rehearsal dinner or perhaps have a casual brunch the morning after the ceremony, but they were insistent that they needed to evaluate my choice of husband and provide their approval before the wedding could proceed. David was actually excited about this meeting, seeing it as an opportunity to make a good impression and possibly begin healing some of the rifts in my family relationships. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let David drive down to Cedar Rapids alone for a weekend visit, while I stayed behind to work on a deadline for a major story. I gave him detailed warnings about what to expect, but I could tell he didn't quite believe that my parents would be as unwelcoming and manipulative as I had described. David had grown up in a family where conflicts were addressed directly and resolved through honest conversation, and he couldn't quite wrap his mind around the idea of parents who would actively sabotage their daughter's happiness out of spite or favoritism. When David returned from Cedar Rapids, he was practically vibrating with excitement and righteous anger, carrying a small digital recorder that he had used to document the entire visit. He had gone into the meeting prepared for them to dislike him or to make subtle digs about my judgment or character, but what actually happened was so much worse and more bizarre than either of us had anticipated. Instead of simply being rude or unwelcoming, my parents and Emma had sat him down and made him a proposal that was so outrageous, so completely tone-deaf, that David initially thought they were joking. They wanted Emma to walk down the aisle at our wedding first, wearing a wedding dress and carrying a bouquet, while photographers took pictures and guests watched her glide toward the altar. Their reasoning was that it wasn't fair for a younger sister to get married before an older one, and that this ceremony would give Emma the experience of being a bride without taking anything away from my actual wedding. They explained this plan with the earnestness of people who genuinely believed they were proposing a reasonable compromise, as if asking another woman to upstage the bride at her own wedding was a perfectly normal request that any loving family might make. David had been so stunned by the suggestion that he temporarily lost his ability to form coherent sentences, which my family had apparently interpreted as consideration rather than shock. He managed to tell them that he would need to discuss it with me and get back to them, then escaped to his car where he sat in their driveway for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. The drive back to Minneapolis had given him time to move from disbelief to fury to a kind of gleeful anticipation, as he realized that my family had just handed us the perfect opportunity for revenge. As David played me the recording of their conversation, I felt a complex mixture of emotions washing over me in waves. There was the familiar hurt and disappointment at being treated as less important than Emma, but there was also a kind of relief at having concrete proof that my family's behavior was as unreasonable and cruel as I had always known it to be. David's presence and his outraged reaction helped me see the situation more clearly, freed from the self-doubt and gaslighting that had shaped my perspective for so many years. Together, we began plotting a response that would give them exactly what they deserved while protecting our wedding from their destructive influence. Our initial ideas were elaborate and potentially illegal, involving fake wedding venues and hired actors and other schemes that David's more level-headed brother eventually talked us out of when we called him for advice. We settled on a plan that was both simpler and more satisfying. We would pretend to agree to their proposal while secretly hiring security to prevent Emma from entering the actual venue. David would return to Cedar Rapids and tell my parents that, while I was initially upset by their suggestion, he had managed to convince me that it would be a beautiful way to honor family traditions and make Emma feel included in our special day. The months leading up to the wedding became an elaborate performance, with David making regular trips to Cedar Rapids to discuss details and coordinate plans, while I pretended to be reluctantly going along with an arrangement that I found emotionally difficult but was trying to accept for the sake of family harmony. David threw himself into the role of conspirator with the enthusiasm of someone who had found his true calling, convincing my parents that I was a jealous and controlling fiancé who required careful management and strategic manipulation to keep happy. During these visits, David would take Emma shopping for wedding dresses and flowers, pretending to bond with her while secretly recording her making cruel comments about me, and boasting about how she would look better in wedding photos than I would. My parents paid for increasingly expensive upgrades to our wedding cake, flowers, and catering, believing they were indulging Emma's preferences while keeping me in the dark about the true costs. David had convinced them that surprising me with these luxurious touches would make me so grateful and overwhelmed that I wouldn't have the heart to object to Emma's participation in the ceremony. The deception required David to spend hours in my parents' house, listening to them criticize everything about me from my appearance to my personality to my career choices, nodding sympathetically while internally recording evidence of their toxic behavior. He had to pretend to be conflicted about marrying someone as difficult and unstable as they portrayed me to be, while Emma openly flirted with him and suggested that he would be much happier with someone more easygoing and fun-loving like herself. The whole experience was emotionally exhausting for both of us, but it also felt empowering to finally be taking control of the narrative instead of simply enduring their treatment in silence. As our wedding day approached, the final details of our counterplan fell into place with satisfying precision. David had arranged for professional security to be stationed at the venue, but instructed them to remain inconspicuous until Emma actually arrived and attempted to enter the building. We had also enlisted the help of my college roommate, Jessica, who was thrilled to play a supporting role in what she considered a long overdue come-uppance for my terrible family. Jessica would be positioned near the entrance with her phone ready to record Emma's reaction when she was turned away, and she had prepared several loud questions designed to draw attention to the situation and force my parents to explain their behavior to the other wedding guests. The morning of our wedding dawned clear and beautiful, with golden sunlight streaming through the windows of the hotel room, where I was getting ready with my bridesmaids. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about our wedding day instead of anxious about the various ways my family might try to sabotage it. I knew that whatever happened, David and I would be married by the end of the day, and that our friends and extended family members would witness our commitment to each other in a ceremony that truly reflected our values and our love. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon, but my parents had been told by David that it would begin at 3:30 to give Emma time to complete her walk down the aisle before I made my entrance. Emma had spent the morning at a salon getting her hair and makeup done in full bridal style, and she had purchased an elaborate white gown that was actually more expensive and ornate than the dress I had chosen for myself. According to the plan that my family believed we were all following, Emma would arrive at precisely 3:25, walk slowly down the aisle while photographers captured every moment, then retreat to a side room to change into a more appropriate outfit for a wedding guest. What actually happened was far more dramatic and satisfying than I could have imagined. Emma arrived at the venue in her wedding dress, accompanied by my parents who were dressed in their finest clothes and carrying flowers that were meant to be part of her bridal bouquet. They approached the entrance with confident smiles, clearly anticipating their moment of triumph and the surprised gratitude they expected me to express. Once I realized how beautiful and meaningful Emma's participation would make our ceremony, the security guard, an imposing man in his 50s who had been briefed on the situation and was being paid handsomely for his discretion, politely informed Emma that she must be confused about the venue because there was already a bride inside preparing for her ceremony. When my parents began arguing with him and demanding to speak to whoever was in charge, he calmly explained that he was following the direct instructions of the bride and groom who had hired him, and that his job was to ensure that only invited guests were admitted to the wedding. The argument escalated quickly, with my father threatening to call the police and my mother demanding to see documentation proving that the security guard was legitimately employed. Emma began crying and stamping her feet like a toddler having a tantrum, her elaborate hairstyle becoming disheveled as she gestured wildly, and her makeup beginning to run in black streaks down her cheeks. Jessica chose that moment to emerge from the venue and begin loudly asking what was wrong, why Emma was wearing a wedding dress to someone else's wedding, and whether there had been some kind of terrible misunderstanding about the event. The commotion drew the attention of other wedding guests who had been arriving and mingling in the lobby, and soon there was a crowd of people witnessing my family's meltdown and demanding explanations for their bizarre behavior. My parents tried to blame David, insisting that he had approved Emma's participation and that we were all part of an elaborate plan to honor family traditions. But no one believed them when they couldn't produce any written evidence of these alleged agreements. David appeared in the doorway with a perfectly confused expression, asking what was going on and why Emma was dressed like a bride at our wedding. When my parents accused him of going back on his word and betraying their trust, David looked genuinely baffled and asked them why they would ever think he had agreed to something so inappropriate and hurtful to his bride. He pointed out that anyone who truly loved me would want our wedding day to be special and memorable for the right reasons, not an opportunity to humiliate me or make me share the spotlight with someone else. His performance was Oscar-worthy, conveying just the right mixture of confusion, disappointment, and protective anger on my behalf. Meanwhile, I was inside the venue getting final touch-ups on my hair and makeup, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding outside, but confident that David and Jessica had everything under control. When my wedding coordinator knocked on the door to let me know that it was time to begin the processional, I felt a sense of peace and anticipation that I had never experienced before in relation to my family events. For once, a day that was supposed to be about me would actually focus on my happiness and my choices and my future, instead of being hijacked by Emma's needs and my parents' favoritism. The ceremony itself was everything I had dreamed it would be, intimate and meaningful, and filled with people who genuinely cared about David and me as individuals and as a couple. My father-in-law walked me down the aisle when my own father failed to appear, and his warm smile and steady presence helped me feel cherished and supported in a way that my own family had never managed to provide. David was waiting for me at the altar with tears in his eyes and a joy on his face that made my heart feel like it might burst with happiness. And when we exchanged vows, I felt like we were creating something pure and new that couldn't be tainted by the toxicity I had grown up with. Our wedding reception was a celebration in the truest sense of the word, with dancing and laughter and heartfelt toasts that focused on our love story and our bright future together. Several guests mentioned to me throughout the evening that they had witnessed some kind of disturbance outside before the ceremony, but that it had been handled quickly and hadn't disrupted the actual wedding at all. I pretended to be unaware of what they were referring to, allowing them to believe that I had been protected from whatever drama had unfolded, and I could see the protective instincts of our friends and family members kicking in as they worked to ensure that our celebration remained joyful and stress-free. David and I spent our wedding night in a luxurious hotel suite that my parents had paid for as part of their attempt to buy their way into my good graces, and we toasted our successful revenge plot with champagne while reading the increasingly unhinged text messages that Emma had been sending throughout the evening. Her messages revealed the depth of her narcissism and entitlement, blaming me for orchestrating her humiliation and accusing David of being a manipulative liar who had deceived them for months. The irony was not lost on us that she was accusing him of exactly the kind of manipulative behavior that she and my parents had been engaging in my entire life. The fallout from our wedding day spread through our extended family with the speed and intensity of a wildfire, as relatives who had witnessed the incident shared their shock and disapproval with those who hadn't been there to see it firsthand. David had strategically shared screenshots of Emma's text messages and recordings of my parents' threats with our family group chat, positioning himself as the protective husband who was trying to shield me from harassment during what should have been the happiest time of our lives. The narrative he crafted portrayed my parents and Emma as unstable and vindictive people who had tried to sabotage our wedding out of jealousy and spite, and who were now trying to rewrite history to make themselves look like the victims. Our extended family rallied around us with a support and protectiveness that I had never experienced before, offering to intervene with my parents and demanding that they leave us alone to enjoy our honeymoon in peace. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of a family that actually cared about my well-being and was willing to stand up for me when I was being mistreated. The validation was overwhelming and healing in ways I hadn't expected, helping me realize how much damage had been done by years of being gaslit and manipulated by the people who were supposed to love me most. David and I spent 2 weeks in Europe for our honeymoon, visiting museums and cafes and historic sites, while my phone remained blissfully silent. thanks to the intervention of our family members who had made it clear that any further harassment would result in serious consequences. When we returned home to Minneapolis, we found our apartment filled with flowers and congratulatory cards from relatives and friends who wanted to celebrate our marriage and express their support for us as a couple. The contrast with my childhood experience of holidays and special occasions, which had always been fraught with tension and favoritism, was so stark that it sometimes brought me to tears of gratitude. In the months that followed our wedding, I began therapy to work through the complex trauma of growing up in a family where love was conditional and my worth was constantly questioned. My therapist helped me understand that what I had experienced was a form of emotional abuse called scapegoating, where one child becomes the repository for all of the family's dysfunction and problems, while another child is idealized and protected from consequences. Understanding that there was actually a name for what had happened to me and that other people had survived similar experiences was incredibly validating and helped me realize that my family's treatment of me said everything about their character and nothing about my inherent value as a person. David continued to document my family's attempts to contact us and manipulate the narrative about our wedding, creating a detailed record of their behavior that would protect us if they ever tried to claim that we had been the ones acting unreasonably or vindictively. His natural instinct for justice and his complete inability to tolerate unfairness had been exactly what I needed to finally stand up to people who had spent my entire life taking advantage of my desire to keep the peace and avoid confrontation. Together, it was the revenge. Emma and they never David, the extent we host when I asked, it was a moment when the entire family witnessed the consequences of favoritism and emotional manipulation. And it forced everyone to choose sides in a way that ultimately strengthened the bonds between those of us who believed in treating each other with dignity and respect. The most unexpected outcome of our wedding day drama has been the number of people who have reached out to David and me over the years to share their own stories of family dysfunction and to ask for advice about setting boundaries with toxic relatives. Apparently, our story has spread beyond our immediate circle through social media and word of mouth, and it has resonated with people who recognize their own experiences in the patterns of favoritism and scapegoating that defined my childhood. David and I have found ourselves becoming accidental advocates for people who are struggling to extract themselves from similar situations, and while it wasn't a role we actively sought, it has given our experience a sense of purpose and meaning that extends beyond our personal healing. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never met David, if I had continued to accept my family's treatment of me as normal and inevitable. I probably would have remained isolated and self-doubting, always wondering what was wrong with me that made me unworthy of the same love and support that Emma received so effortlessly. I might have married someone who reflected my own low sense of self-worth, or I might have remained single and convinced myself that I was too difficult and demanding to maintain healthy relationships with anyone. Instead, I found someone who saw my worth immediately and completely, who couldn't understand why anyone would treat me as anything less than precious and deserving of protection. David's outrage on my behalf helped me realize that what I had experienced wasn't normal family dynamics or harmless sibling rivalry, but actual abuse that had shaped my entire sense of self in destructive ways. His love and support gave me the strength to finally fight back, not with the childish tantrums or emotional manipulations that my family would have expected, but with the calm determination of an adult who understands her own value and refuses to accept less than she deserves. Our marriage has continued to be a source of healing and growth for both of us, as we've learned to navigate the world as partners who truly support each other's dreams and ambitions. David has encouraged me to pursue freelance writing opportunities that have allowed me to work from home and focus on topics that matter to me, while I have supported his transition from journalism into teaching, a career change that has brought him enormous satisfaction and fulfillment. We've created a life together that feels abundant and purposeful, filled with travel and creativity and meaningful relationships with people who genuinely care about our well-being. The story of our wedding day has become part of our family folklore, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations, as an example of what can happen when people finally stand up to bullies and refuse to be mistreated. Our nieces and nephews have grown up hearing this story as a cautionary tale about the importance of treating everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of their position in the family hierarchy. They've learned that love isn't supposed to be conditional or competitive, and that families should be safe spaces where everyone feels valued and supported, rather than arenas where siblings compete for scraps of parental attention and approval. As I finish telling this story, I'm sitting in the kitchen of the house that David and I bought 3 years ago, watching him work in our garden while our rescue dog sleeps in a patch of sunlight by the back door. It's a peaceful scene that would have seemed impossible to imagine during those dark years of my childhood when I felt invisible and worthless, and trapped in a family that seemed determined to keep me small and powerless. The distance between who I was then and who I am now sometimes feels insurmountable, as if I'm looking back at a different person entirely, someone who accepted terrible treatment because she didn't know that anything better was possible. But I also know that the girl who survived all of those years of emotional neglect and manipulation was already stronger than she realized, already developing the resilience and determination that would eventually allow her to build a life filled with genuine love and respect and joy. She was learning important lessons about justice and fairness and the difference between people who care about your well-being and people who only care about their own comfort and convenience. She was becoming someone who would recognize true partnership when it appeared, and who would have the courage to fight for the kind of love that lifts people up instead of tearing them down. The revenge we orchestrated on our wedding day was satisfying and empowering and probably long overdue, but the real victory has been everything that came after: the therapy and healing, the strong marriage, the chosen family of friends and relatives who actually deserve our love and trust. The knowledge that we have the power to create the kind of life we want instead of simply enduring whatever circumstances we were born into. We learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in systems that are designed to diminish you, and that walking away from toxicity isn't giving up or being vindictive, but rather an act of self-preservation and self-respect that opens up space for healthier relationships to flourish. The healing process hasn't been linear or simple, and there have been moments over the past 5 years when I've questioned whether we did the right thing by orchestrating such a public humiliation of my family. During particularly difficult therapy sessions, when I was working through layers of childhood trauma and trying to understand how deeply the emotional abuse had affected my sense of self, I sometimes wondered if we could have found a more compassionate way to handle the situation. The guilt that comes with standing up to people who raised you, even when they treated you terribly, is something that's hard to explain to people who grew up in healthy families, where conflicts were resolved through honest communication and mutual respect. My therapist, Dr. Dora Martinez, helped me understand that this guilt was actually a symptom of the conditioning I had received throughout my childhood, where I was taught that my role in the family was to absorb dysfunction and protect everyone else from the consequences of their behavior. She explained that children who grow up as scapegoats often develop an overdeveloped sense of responsibility for other people's emotions, and they struggle to believe that they deserve to prioritize their own well-being over the comfort of people who have mistreated them. Learning to recognize these patterns and challenge the internal voice that told me I was being selfish or vindictive for protecting myself has been one of the most difficult aspects of my healing journey. David has been an incredible source of support throughout this process, but he's also had to do his own work to understand how his upbringing in a loving, functional family sometimes made it difficult for him to fully grasp the complexity of my relationship with my parents and Emma. During our second year of marriage, we went through a rough patch when David became frustrated with what he saw as my tendency to second-guess our decision and to express sympathy for people who had treated me so cruelly for so many years. He couldn't understand why I wasn't simply relieved to be free of their toxicity, and why I sometimes felt sad about the loss of hope that maybe someday we could have a normal family relationship. We worked through this challenge with couples therapy, where we both learned important lessons about how trauma affects relationships and how partners can support each other through the healing process without trying to fix or rush the journey. David came to understand that my occasional moments of grief and doubt weren't signs that I wanted to reconnect with my family, but rather natural responses to mourning the parents and sister I had always wished I could have. I learned to communicate more clearly about what I needed from David during difficult moments, and to recognize that his protective instincts and desire for justice came from a place of love, even when they sometimes felt overwhelming. The ripple effects of our wedding day drama extended far beyond our immediate family circle in ways we never could have anticipated. About 6 months after our wedding, I received a message through social media from a woman named Jennifer, who had heard about our story through a mutual friend and wanted to thank me for sharing it. Jennifer explained that she had been struggling with a similar dynamic in her own family, where her parents consistently favored her brother and dismissed her achievements while making excuses for his failures and bad behavior. Hearing about how David and I had stood up for ourselves had given her the courage to start setting boundaries with her family and to seek therapy to work through years of feeling inadequate and invisible. Over the following months and years, we heard from dozens of people who had recognized their own experiences in our story and had been inspired to make changes in their own lives. Some had cut contact with toxic family members, others had begun therapy or started having difficult conversations about family dynamics that had been ignored for years. A few had even shared our story with their own family members as a way of explaining why certain behaviors were unacceptable and needed to change. The idea that our personal experience of standing up to bullies could serve as encouragement for other people dealing with similar situations added a layer of meaning and purpose to our story that we hadn't expected but deeply appreciated. One of the most powerful messages we received came from a mother named Lisa, whose teenage daughter was being systematically excluded and criticized by her ex-husband and his new wife, who showered attention and privileges on their biological son while treating Lisa's daughter like an unwanted burden. Lisa had been struggling with how to protect her daughter from this dynamic without creating more conflict or putting the child in the middle of adult disputes. But our story helped her realize that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable toxic behavior, even when it means rocking the boat or facing criticism from people who benefit from the status quo. Lisa ended up going back to court to modify the custody arrangement and ensure that her daughter wouldn't be subjected to continued emotional abuse during visitation, a decision that required tremendous courage and resulted in significant legal expenses, but ultimately protected her child from further psychological damage. She wrote to us a year later to let us know that her daughter was thriving in therapy and had begun to rebuild her self-esteem after being removed from the toxic environment where she had been made to feel worthless and unwanted. These stories from strangers who had found hope and validation in our experience helped me understand that sharing our truth, even when it felt vulnerable or uncomfortable, could serve a purpose beyond our own healing. David and I began speaking more openly about our experience with friends and colleagues, not to seek attention or sympathy, but to help normalize conversations about family dysfunction and to encourage other people who might be struggling with similar situations to seek support and consider their options for protecting themselves. The professional success that followed our decision to prioritize our well-being and surround ourselves with supportive people has been another unexpected blessing of our journey. Without the constant stress and emotional drain of managing my family's toxic behavior, I've been able to focus my energy on creative projects and career opportunities that align with my values and interests. My freelance writing career has flourished as I've found my voice and gained confidence in sharing stories about resilience, healing, and the importance of healthy relationships. I've written articles about recognizing emotional abuse in families, setting boundaries with toxic relatives, and building chosen families with people who actually deserve your trust and loyalty. These pieces have resonated with readers who are hungry for honest conversations about family dysfunction and practical advice for protecting themselves while still honoring their own needs for connection and belonging. The positive response to my writing has shown me that there are countless people out there who are struggling with similar experiences but often feel isolated and ashamed because our culture tends to idealize family relationships and stigmatize people who choose to distance themselves from relatives who treat them poorly. David's transition into teaching has also been successful beyond our wildest dreams, partly because his natural passion for justice and his inability to tolerate bullying have made him an incredibly effective advocate for students who are struggling with difficult situations at home or school. He's become known among his colleagues as someone who goes above and beyond to support kids who are dealing with family trauma, and he's developed programs and resources to help other educators recognize and respond appropriately to signs of emotional abuse and neglect. His work with troubled students has also provided him with additional perspective on our own story, as he's witnessed firsthand how family dysfunction can affect children's academic performance, social relationships, and sense of self-worth. He often comes home with stories about students who remind him of me at that age, kids who are quietly excelling academically while dealing with chaos and instability at home. And these experiences have deepened his understanding of the resilience and strength it took for me to survive my childhood and build a successful adult life. The decision to start a family of our own has been one that we've approached with a great deal of intentionality and preparation, knowing that we both carry baggage from our respective childhoods that could affect our parenting if we're not careful. I've been working with my therapist to identify and challenge the negative messages about myself that I internalized during my childhood, and to develop healthier models for how parents should treat their children and how family relationships should function. David and I have had countless conversations about what kind of parents we want to be and what values we want to instill in our future children. We've talked about the importance of treating each child as an individual with their own unique strengths and challenges, rather than making comparisons or playing favorites. We've discussed how to handle sibling conflicts fairly and how to create an environment where all of our children feel equally loved and valued, regardless of their personalities or abilities or achievements. We've also talked honestly about our fears and concerns, acknowledging that parenting will likely trigger some of our own childhood wounds and force us to confront patterns of thinking and behaving that we may not even realize we've inherited from our families of origin. We've committed to continuing therapy both individually and as a couple throughout our parenting journey, and to seeking additional support and resources whenever we feel overwhelmed or uncertain about how to handle specific challenges. The extended family that has embraced us since our wedding has provided us with wonderful models of healthy parenting and functional family relationships. Watching David's parents interact with their grandchildren and seeing how my aunts and uncles treat their own kids and each other has given us concrete examples of what supportive family dynamics look like in practice. These relationships have shown us that it's possible to have disagreements and conflicts without resorting to manipulation or favoritism, and that love within families should feel secure and unconditional rather than competitive or scarce. Our chosen family of close friends has also been instrumental in our healing and growth, providing us with the kind of loyal, supportive relationships that we both craved but never experienced in our families of origin. These friendships have taught us what it means to be truly seen and valued for who we are, and they've given us practice in the skills of healthy communication, conflict resolution, and mutual support that we'll need as we build our own family. The friendships we've built have also helped us understand the difference between people who genuinely care about our well-being and people who are primarily interested in what they can get from us or how they can use us to meet their own emotional needs. This discernment has been crucial in protecting us from falling into similar patterns with other people in our lives, and it's helped us build a social circle that feels truly nourishing and reciprocal rather than draining or one-sided. One of the most profound changes I've experienced since our wedding day is a shift in how I view myself and my place in the world. For most of my life, I operated from a place of scarcity and fear, believing that I had to work twice as hard as everyone else to deserve love and acceptance, and that any mistake or imperfection would result in rejection and abandonment. This mindset affected everything from my academic performance to my career choices to my romantic relationships, as I constantly tried to anticipate what other people wanted from me and mold myself to meet their expectations. Learning to trust that David loves me unconditionally, even when I'm struggling or making mistakes or going through difficult periods, has been a revolutionary experience that has changed how I show up in all areas of my life. I've learned to take risks and pursue opportunities that interest me without constantly worrying about whether I'm good enough or smart enough or worthy enough to succeed. I've learned to express my opinions and preferences without apologizing or minimizing my own needs, and to trust that people who truly care about me will respect my boundaries and support my growth. This newfound confidence and self-worth has also allowed me to be more generous and supportive in my relationships with other people, as I no longer feel like I'm competing for limited resources or trying to prove that I deserve to exist. I've been able to celebrate my friends' successes without feeling threatened or envious, and to offer help and encouragement to people who are struggling without feeling like I need to sacrifice my own well-being in the process. The contrast between how I feel now and how I felt during my childhood is so stark that sometimes it's difficult to believe that both experiences belong to the same person. The scared, insecure girl who spent years trying to earn her parents' love and approval feels like someone I knew in another lifetime, someone I feel deep compassion for but don't identify with in any meaningful way. The woman I've become is confident and purposeful and surrounded by people who genuinely value her contributions to their lives. And while the journey to get here was often painful and difficult, I wouldn't trade the hard-won wisdom and resilience I've gained for an easier path. As I write this, David and I are in the process of buying a larger house in a neighborhood with excellent schools, preparing for the family we hope to start in the next few years. We've been taking parenting classes and reading books about child development and family dynamics. But more than anything, we've been talking honestly about our hopes and fears and our commitment to breaking the cycles of dysfunction that have affected our families for generations. We know that we'll make mistakes and that parenting will challenge us in ways we can't even imagine yet. But we also know that we have the tools and support systems we need to navigate those challenges with integrity and love. We've learned our story. We've learned the most. We've learned.